At its height, the Roman Empire stretched across 3 continents, maintaining control over a massive, interconnected state through the military presence of its legions. During the Pax Romana, this long period of stability allowed for the construction of monumental stone cities. Buildings like the Colosseum were engineered using advanced concrete and arch systems built to endure for centuries. To sustain a population of nearly 80 million citizens, the state built extensive virtual water networks. Structures like the Pont du Gard aqueduct fed a sophisticated web of global trade and agriculture. But this highly integrated system carried a fatal flaw. Maintaining this level of administration and infrastructure relied entirely on continuous territorial expansion to capture new wealth and resources. When the frontiers stopped expanding in the 2nd century, the Roman economy became a closed loop. The state suddenly had to fund its massive military and bureaucracy solely from internal taxation. Facing growing political instability, emperors of the Severan dynasty decided to prioritize military loyalty over fiscal health. They repeatedly doubled soldier pay, creating a permanent deficit the treasury could not cover. To stretch the money supply, the government turned to debasement. They began minting the denarius with increasingly cheaper base metals instead of pure silver. This chart tracks the denarius. Between 161 and 235 CE, its silver purity drops steeply from 80 to 30%. Simultaneously, a second line tracks the consequence, an explosive spike in consumer prices. This hyperinflation destroyed purchasing power, forcing citizens back into a barter economy. Simultaneously, waves of plague swept through the Mediterranean, killing up to a third of the population in some regions. This demographic collapse crippled agricultural output and further reduced tax revenues. Decades before external threats breached the walls, the state had exhausted its treasury, ruined its currency, and hollowed out its ability to defend itself. While Rome struggled internally, a new geopolitical pressure emerged on the Eurasian steppes. The nomadic Huns began pushing westward, triggering a massive migration chain reaction. This map shows the cascading effect of the Hunnic expansion. The vectors pushing out from the east represent the physical displacement of Gothic and Germanic tribes, driving hundreds of thousands of refugees directly into the Roman frontier. In the bitter winter of 406 CE, the Rhine River froze solid. Facing starvation and the advancing Huns, tens of thousands of desperate tribal refugees walked across the ice and permanently settled within Roman borders. Crippled by citizen recruitment shortages, the Roman military had to enlist these very same tribal groups, known as foederati, to fill out its legions, heavily diluting central loyalty. The breaching of the borders was an administrative failure. A bankrupt, overextended state simply could not absorb or manage a humanitarian crisis of this scale. The internal decay culminated in 410 CE. For the first time in 800 years, a foreign enemy entered the city of Rome. This initial sack by the Visigoths was relatively restrained. The invaders primarily seized portable wealth like gold and silver, and largely spared the major Christian sanctuaries. 45 years later, a second invasion inflicted permanent damage. In 455 CE, the Vandals arrived from Carthage and subjected Rome to a 14-day, state-sponsored economic liquidation of the city. They targeted the physical infrastructure of the city itself, stripping public monuments of their value. Soldiers methodically pried the heavy bronze tiles off the roofs of grand temples to melt them down. This bar chart illustrates the resulting demographic collapse. The Vandals permanently severed Rome's vital grain supply from North Africa, causing the city's population to drop from 1 million residents to fewer than 50,000. These invasions systematically dismantled Rome's wealth and severed the economic lifelines required to sustain a capital city. By 476 CE, the imperial capital had already been moved from Rome to Ravenna, a coastal fortress protected by surrounding marshes. There, the Germanic mercenary general Odoacer confronted the final Western emperor, a 16-year-old boy named Romulus Augustulus, and forced him to abdicate. There was no grand battle or execution. Odoacer spared the deposed teenager and sent him to a country estate in Campania with a generous pension. Seeing no practical reason to maintain a hollow political office, Odoacer gathered the imperial insignia and shipped it to the Eastern Roman court in Constantinople. The event, recognized as the fall of Rome, was a quiet, bureaucratic procedure. The Western Empire was liquidated because it had long ceased to exercise actual power. The dissolution of the West was only half the story. The Eastern Roman Empire would endure for another 1,000 years. The East retained control over the highly productive agricultural and commercial centers of Egypt and Anatolia. These unbroken tax revenues allowed the state to pay for professional standing armies and buy off migrating threats. They also invested heavily in defensive engineering. The capital of Constantinople was shielded by the Theodosian Walls, a massive fortification project that repelled both the Huns and the Goths. Looking at this 3D cross-section of the wall's design, you can see the three-tiered defense system. Attackers first faced a water-filled moat, then an outer wall, and finally a massive inner wall, built 5 meters thick and 12 meters high. The East survived the exact same crises that broke the West because it retained a functioning tax base and utilized unbreachable structural engineering. In the West, the central political apparatus dissolved, but the civilization itself was absorbed by the people who dismantled it. Barbarian kings maintained the Roman Senate and local civil administrations. Over time, the Latin language spoken across the provinces evolved into the modern Romance languages of Europe. Roman legal codes and architectural forms were preserved, providing the foundational blueprints for the governance and infrastructure of the modern Western world. Empires eventually collapse under their own weight, but their systems, ideas, and legacy often survive, deeply embedding themselves into the societies that follow.